and layers I'm clutching to myself. So does anyone have any experiences of letting go or holding on, or how that's changed across your grieving?
Well, I guess I can address that in the sense that I recently sold the unit that Ron and I met in, had his parents living in, and then I remodeled it and moved back in it and thought I would be there the rest of my life, surrounded by all the artwork that we had collected in the years that we traveled. And as you know, the stock market didn't do so well the last year. And being retired, I became a little bit concerned because that was my source of income, drawing off of that. And during COVID, I had purchased a small condo near my grandchildren. So I now had two homes and was living a very nice life, but then became concerned with all that overhead and decided that I wanted to be close to my grandchildren. It made more sense to move to a place where the overhead was less, taxes lower. It just made more sense, but I had to then leave my safe haven that I was surrounded by all the memories of Ron and felt very safe. And tried as best as I could to recreate some of that memory in my now unit, but also introduce some of my own. And so I have a combination, to your point, of letting go, but also bringing the memories with me and recreating. As we all know, we continue to recreate ourselves as we go through this journey of grief. And there isn't a day that doesn't go by that something doesn't come up, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, but it does happen. I'm in talking with my clients today, realizing more and more that the work that I'm doing is continuing to be cathartic for me. And I need to continue to let go. I continue to need to grow. And I continue to need to believe in myself as I take this journey. And the journey is believing in myself. And everyone, just like all of you, are gifts to me and gifts to me in this stage of my life. So with that, I will pass it on to someone else. But thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Carol.
I found that in my day job as an attorney who does estate planning and estate settlement, I see every manner of how people handle things. And I have some widows and widowers who have everything packaged up and stored or donated by the end of the week. And that was not me. So I was able to have some grace around it and just say, I'm going to take my time. And what I've noticed is kind of what you've described, Allison, kind of like a spiraling up. It's not quite an archaeological dig because we didn't, even though my husband was a keeper, not a hoarder, but a keeper. So I had a lot of things. I just let it feel natural and wasn't pushing it. I know that some people feel really anxious around that.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say I haven't lost a spouse, but in having lost my my parents, both my parents, I still have not gone through their stuff. My brother lives in the house where my parents lived, so the stuff is still there, and I cannot get myself to go over there because the last time I was there, it was still my parents' house, and now, and I'm thrilled that my brother lives there, and I want him to make it his own, which I'm sure he has. I can't get myself to do it. I cannot get myself to go into it's gonna make me cry right now, to go into my parents' house. So I'm struggling with that.
You know,
when my parents died, my father died about 14 years before my mother. And because my brothers and I were all in town, after the week of sitting Shiva, my mother sat us down and said, okay, now we got to go through things. And I sort of looked at her and I said, well, you don't have to rush. And she said, well, I think I should. And so she knew certain things my father wanted each of us to have. But then she took me into the bedroom and said, let me go through his clothes. You know, and she was asking me if I thought my brothers would want something. They were in the other room. If my husband would want something. And we really didn't. We got those little trinkets. That's all we needed. But by the end of that day, my father's closet was empty. And the only thing she didn't give up was his oxygen tank. She wanted to keep it. I'm not quite sure why, but she did. And when my mother passed away, she was living in an aging community. And so her apartment was going to be gone within days after she passed away. And so as she laid in bed, I was going through her closet, cleaning it out. And she was still breathing and talking to me. The only thing that I can say that made that comfortable was when I found out that she had over 100 pairs of black slacks hanging in her closet with the tags still on. Because every time my brother or I came to visit her in Michigan, she told us she needed a pair of black slacks. So we always bought her two. And they were still hanging in the closet. But we had to break down her stuff. And I was the one that was nominated to do it. And in some ways it was a good thing because I got to see things and touch them. But it was difficult when there were certain things that had so many memories and nobody wanted them. And seeing them go to Goodwill, that was the toughest part.
Interesting how we do want to hold on to so many of those things. And I know when my parents passed away, my sister and I were going through things. My sister really wanted to keep almost everything, pots and pans, pictures, pajama. I mean, just everything. I wanted the pictures, the family pictures, but it was real interesting how we went at it from different angles on what meant something to each one of us. When the house was sold, I was the one crying. I don't live in town, but when I go back to town, I still drive by the house every time. In fact, there was a point in time when I asked the new owners if I could go in. It was my childhood home. Like many of us, it was the home we were born and raised in. But it's interesting how we all interpret death and grieving differently, and can't emphasize enough that there is not a right or wrong way to do it. It's so individualized. There are many commonalities, but there's no time frame and there's no right or wrong. I was dealing with a client today and she was saying that, isn't it time for me to be doing better? And I said, define time, define doing better. Let's look back at where you were and where you are. But there is no time frame. So it becomes real interesting. And before I hand it off again, I want to go back to something that Allison said about boundaries and about the information being out on Google and Facebook and all over the internet. When my husband had his accident, nobody really knew what was going on. But it happened at one of the premier health clubs in Chicago. And one of his instructors, personal trainers, came to the hospital to see him. Nobody was being let into the room, and she somehow managed to get through. At that point in time, not knowing how the rest of the family felt about it, she started talking about it at the health club. And I got that phone call, which made it a reality. So to that point, up until then, I felt pretty safe that only this immediate family knew what was going on. And maybe there was a scintilla of hope that something would change. And the outside world didn't know what was happening. When I got that phone call from that one individual that was a very dear friend of his, my world was crushed. It became a reality. So I appreciate you bringing up boundaries, and some of them we just don't have control over, which is unfortunate. So.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a client last week, and she's just moved because she was very uncomfortable in her home, actually in pain. In the home that she lived in with her husband. And so she moved to another place, and there was some old family baggage, traumatic stuff that had happened to her. And one of her relatives chose the moment she got out of the car to confront her about this old stuff in a time when she had just driven for 3 days. She had left a place she knew to a place she didn't know. And she didn't know how to say no, because her barriers were down. She was in such a vulnerable state, from grieving, leaving where she was to an unknown place. You know, even though she had all kinds of mixed feelings, it was still grief. And so for this person to come at her in that moment, and I think of my friend's wife, and there are pictures of their home, and I can imagine flowers outside the gates. Sounds nice, but a memory every time she goes out the door of her reality. I saw a note from Bruce Willis's wife asking for them to give them peace as they deal as a family with what's going on. And he just had a birthday, and she sent out a plea, you know, don't say, hey, how you doing? Yippee-ki-yay. Don't say lines from the movie. It's distressing for everybody. But that's the kind of boundary stuff people do. And they think they're being comforting, but not necessarily.
So what do our listeners have? What lesson can they learn from what we're talking about?
Well, one of the things that I recommend to my clients is to think through as much in advance when they're going into situations where people could ask uncomfortable questions. So it's not uncommon for someone to come up to a widow and say, so how'd your husband die? Without even thinking about it. And so if you can think in advance about, okay, well, what are the possible things that I could say to that question? Where do I want to stand on that? Do I want to say, I'm not comfortable talking about this? I had this conversation actually with a client last week. And I said, you know, you can say, we're in a public place, and this topic makes me cry. So I really am not comfortable speaking about it right now. And she really liked that way of positioning it because it didn't lay blame on the other person. It just stated what was true, and she didn't have to talk about it after that. in a way that was not offensive in the public setting.
You know, it's interesting when somebody passes away, that is a question that everyone wants to ask. I don't know if they think that they're being comforting or showing, that they really care or what. And people do the same thing when there is any other loss. I remember when I was going through my divorce, everyone asked me, did you do something wrong? And my only answer was, I don't know. Did I? Turning the blame on myself because I must have. Those questions are really nobody else's business.
Yep.
And I'm hoping, our listeners hear it and understand that if I want to tell you something that's personal, I'm going to tell you. If I don't think it's for your ears, then I'm not going to share it. And those are boundaries.
There are two things that I say to my clients when this comes up, and one of them is, thank you for your concern. Now is not the time. And the other one is just holding their hands up and saying, there are no words, especially when everyone is going, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Or I understand. There are no words. And then again, with the questions, thank you for your concern, but now is not the time. So, and part of it is, I feel that our community doesn't know how to approach and address it. Many of them haven't experienced the depth of pain or coping with the pain ongoing with a loss. And hopefully our podcast, to your question, Candace, is helping the community understand that there are boundaries to respect when someone is grieving. And you don't wear the grieving. People don't always know that you're grieving. And that's why it's incumbent upon us that if a situation arises, that we are comfortable enough to say, this is uncomfortable for me, or this is not the time or place. And then to your point, Karen, getting out there and getting into the community and having more sessions so people do understand that it's ongoing. And it's not, shouldn't you be over this by now? It's already been 6 months or it's been 3 years. Why aren't you beyond this? Why are you still dealing with this? There is no time frame on grief. And even if you get into another meaningful relationship, and hopefully you will, because you're here, you're living into the point of the note you read, and I had read it too, and it had touched my heart. I am very thankful that Ron isn't here to feel the pain that I'm feeling. But I also know that I am here, and I hope that I can enjoy the rest of my life here.
Absolutely.
And be able to heal enough and cope with the pain to be able to give again and to receive again. But again, incumbent upon us in helping the rest of the community understand that, and that there is no right or wrong. Everyone grieves in their own way, but we need to be able to respect it.
I just
Christine?
wanted to add, yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add that I think that you made a really good point, Carol, about our community, our culture just doesn't know how to do this. They don't know what to do when somebody's grieving. So I'm just going to offer something that I think would be helpful to anybody out there who has, 100% of us are grievers. You're going to run into somebody who's grieving. So a lot of times when we are hurting, we'll have people say stuff to us that is just not helpful. And those things are usually things that are intellectually true. So things like, well, at least you have another son, or, God won't give you more than you can handle, or a number of different things. And those are all things that may be intellectually true, but when somebody is grieving, they don't need to hear intellectual things. You need to speak to their heart. So throw all of those intellectually true things away and just speak to their heart. My heart is breaking for you, or, my heart goes out to you. I'm so sorry. I'm here for you. That, like, you don't have to do anything else.
And I think another point to tag on to what y'all are saying is for the griever, not to be unprepared for those unartful ways people express themselves. You know, they're probably not being malicious, they just don't know any better. But not to hide away and avoid, but to recognize something like that might happen and be prepared for it. So to insulate yourself or, you know, have some kind of coping plan worked out ahead of time so that you're not caught unawares.
And don't be afraid to ask for a hug or to give a hug. Hugs go a long way, received and distributed.
And I
From the
love
heart.
that you said that, Carol, because you and I talked yesterday, and I had mentioned that my son was doing well in Texas, but he's still very homesick. And we made a pact before he moved that he has a couple pillows or plushies, and he gave me his favorite white teddy bear that he had when he was a baby. And that sits in my room. And when he says he needs a hug, I hug the teddy bear and he hugs the plushie. And he says, I don't care how old I am. I still need human touch. And, you know, there are ways. And then yesterday, as we finished our phone call, you know, you said, I'm giving you a hug right now. And just hearing that, you know, I could feel arms around me. And so there are things that we can say to each other that can fill the void. And maybe it takes a little bit of practice.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was struck when you said, Carol, no words, because after Lance died, I reached out to his wife and I had a conversation with myself. They're famous people. I don't know her that well. Maybe she doesn't want to hear. I had this entire dialogue going on with myself about should I reach out or shouldn't I reach out? Would I be a burden? Which I think we do, because we don't necessarily, even I don't necessarily know what to do. And I shot her a text that said, no words, only tears. So I was struck when you said that. And she wrote back almost immediately, actually. And when I was writing the text, and this is really for our audience, if someone has suffered a recent loss, communicating in a way that doesn't require them to do anything is really helpful. So to provide the connective tissue between you and another person is really essential, but not in a way that requires them to do a whole lot.
Well,
And
even
also
your
letting
text to
them know
her.
when they are ready, that you will be there for them.
Yep.
Candace, you were going to say something?
I think it might have been Christy.
Oh, Christy, someone.
Anybody want to say something?
It wasn't me, but I do a similar thing. When somebody's hurting, I'll just text them and tell them, you know, whatever the situation may be, I'll just tell them, hey, I love you. I'm here for you. And I always say, don't feel like you need to respond to this. Just know I'm here. And I'll usually text a few days later and just say, I'm here. I just want them to know I'm here. But always with that, you don't need to reply. I just want you to know I'm here. I'm thinking of you. I love you.
To
Don't you
that
think
point,
that sometimes our intimate family says some of the most hurtful things, not on purpose, but they do say them. I know when my mother died, and it was at the funeral service, a cousin of mine stepped up to me and she said, so your mother's not in pain anymore and you don't have to pretend that she can see. And I just looked at her. I had no words. Couldn't respond to that. To this day, You know, we are about 300 miles apart from each other. When I'm in the same area, I don't let her know. I did run into her the last time I was up in Michigan a couple weeks ago. Very strangely, she walked into the Starbucks where I was sitting with another friend, a male friend, and guess what? Got public that something must be going on because I was in Detroit with Dennis. It's like, okay. So Candace, you said it best. We have to sort of prepare ourselves that there are going to be people who are going to say things that maybe they don't think are hurtful.
Yeah, they
But-
don't. I mean, most people aren't malicious.
Yeah.
They're just, we call it a unfortunate communication style in our
Yeah.
office.
And sometimes it's in how we interpret it too. You know, our emotions are raw. And so sometimes it just triggers that in a wrong sense. It wasn't meant to be that way.
Well, I remember, Carol, when my father died, this is about a week after he died, and I think we were all still together, and I was watching some program that was a comedy, and he died of a heart attack. And there was a whole big story around a guy who had a heart attack, and it was all ha ha ha. And I was thinking, oh, this is just terrible, you know, how insensitive and so on. It was just very, very raw to that whole concept. And yet in any other context, I wouldn't have been that sensitive.
Yeah, and there are pockets of moments where it's worse.
Mhm.
And then pockets of moments where it would be okay. But we don't necessarily know when those are going to hit.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit more about letting go of things. My husband left me hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of paintings, moving the end of September. And so my quest is to only move. I mean, I won't let go of all the paintings by the time I'm done, but to only move with what I love as much as possible. And so I had, about 2 weeks ago, I went through these enormous 40 by 60 paintings, big, huge portraits, not saleable, don't particularly like them, but my husband loved them. And I destroyed them. I put them in trash bags and I threw them out.
How did you feel doing that?
I got it done and I wept. And then I took them down to actually get them out of the apartment and I was relieved. So it was a real mix of sadness, and I had no interest in having these things in my home, but they had been in my home for almost 7 years since they got moved here. And so there's that mix of, but until this time, close to 7 years after Dave died, I could not have destroyed those paintings, even though I didn't want them, even though I didn't like them. There's a painting of me that he did, full length, that I always hated. I mean, hated from the minute he painted it. And I still kept it for almost 7 years. And I folded it up and I put it in a trash bag and it went out.
So
But-
you needed a reason.
I needed a reason. So the moving became a force function for peeling off the next layer of letting go.
Is there a way with what's left that you could auction them off or sell them and do it as a fundraiser for a charity in memory of Dave, or to a charity that he was involved in, or something for bereavement?
Well, I need the money that the paintings will get me. So
Okay.
I can't actually do that from a practical standpoint, but I can let go of and send to other homes the things I don't love. You know, I can bring the prices down so people buy them. I can do, and I'm now to a point where that's possible. But it took me close to 7 years. Now, the week he died, all his white shirts went out. White button-down shirts. All of them.
And why is
Gone.
that?
Because I didn't care about that. And so there's kind of emotional things with emotional charge and low-hanging fruit. The shirts were low-hanging fruit. The shoes got bundled up and taken to a hospital. Didn't care.
Funny you mentioned shoes. I still have Ron's shoes under my bed. They traveled with me. They will always be under my bed protecting me, and I love knowing that they're there. Oh, it's funny that you brought, but I just after, geez, maybe almost 20 years, got rid of my grandmother's shoes. I let go of them.
Yep.
So there's something about shoes, obviously, in my life that I must have been a cobbler's child, or I was shoeless at some point in a
Well, I
previous
think
life.
it's
The
something
shoes
to
are so
do-
important to me.
I think it has something to do with, you can kind of see their feet in them, because I have Hutch's shoes and the sneakers, and I can just picture his feet because they've taken on that shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And my grandmother's shoes were very colorful, and it was my grandmother, yes. But it's just interesting. So at some point, we are okay letting go, because really, what is it? It's the memory we're holding on to, the love we're holding on to. And these are just things. And the things can help us through, just like the teddy bear from your son and you're hugging it together. That's beautiful. That's tangible. But there's so many things that just, here, I can go right here. This candlestick holder, I guess you're not gonna be able to see it.
Yeah.
Was from one of our travels.
Yep.
One of our first trips. So it has a great deal of meaning and depth. I will not get rid of it. But there are other things that, yeah, time to move on.
Yeah, there's no must about getting rid of anything. So for our audience, I want to make absolutely clear, keep everything that you want to. But as I've gone through the years, what I've discovered is that in different moments, I'm able to let go of another layer. There's
And it is
another,
layer by layer. Absolutely. Absolutely.
and it's a very natural process, like shedding that a tree sheds its leaves. There's a way, as far as I can tell, that we shed our leaves periodically. And in those moments when we're shedding our leaves, we're able to let go of something else.
And it's another form of grief, another grief event with
Mhm.
mixed emotions about it.
Absolutely. I mean, I wept hard, and I was sad
Absolutely.
for a couple of days.
Well, you had also gone through quite a bit in the past week or so. And so all those emotions are going to, spill over. And that's something that there are groups of people who don't understand that. It's, well, Allison, it's been 7 years. Well,
Yep.
That's just not enough for me. Or, you know what? Was so special to me. He's always going to be part of me. And that's not for anybody else to choose. And when I hear people not understanding, I think that's what makes me angry. But I'm not vocal in front of those people. I come home and I blog about it, or we talk about it on here. But Candace has said it over and over again. We all do it our own way, and that's okay.
And it is okay. And perhaps they haven't experienced it yet. That's another layer that, until you've actually walked the walk, it's hard to talk the talk.
Well, and I think there's a whole spectrum, because I can remember when my mother was moving from the house, we all grew up, not permanently grew up in, but the last house we had been together, and when my dad died, the movers were taking things out and I was helping with some of the delicate things. It was just she and I and the movers. And at one point I turned to her and I said, it must be really hard for you to be saying goodbye to all of this. And yeah, I was emotional about it. And she had grown up during the Depression, as a young child, had, a number of things. Her dad had died when she was 3. So a lot of adversity in her life. And so I recognized in that moment when she said, can't be helped. And it's just the way it needs to be. And, matter of factly took away the feelings. And that was her way. She had learned to cope with loss and adversity. And rather than, shaking her, saying, show some feelings.
She didn't know how.
I think there's the fear of being a burden as well.
Absolutely.
That plays in. I see this a lot with my mother-in-law at this point. Coming on her 100th birthday, she's like, why do you bother with me? And I said, because I love you. And that's what, and at the same time, she exasperates me no end on a regular basis.
She's probably struggling, is it possible, with mortality too, being 100? Why do you bother with me? I don't have a lot of time left. Why are you bothering with me?
Yeah.
Realizing and not really knowing how to express it or deal with it herself.
Well, so this is grief as well. It's grief for her as she ages and as she can do less, and as she doesn't feel like she's keeping the balance. So I have to do more for her and she can do less for me. And so she's always saying, what can I do for you? Glad to do something for you. And there's a limited amount that she can do for me at this point.
But what can she do for you?
She tells the most, when you've lived close to 100 years, she sings me songs. She tells the most marvelous stories. She worked for embassies and she worked for
Those are the
hospitals.
greatest gifts.
Yep.
That's what I said. And that she can give you. Nobody else can.
Exactly. And so more and more, I'm trying to shift my time with her to be doing less and being there more.
Are you recording them or writing them down or?
I
Somehow.
haven't been. I really should do that. But
these
What a
are,
gift.
these are
What
going
a
to be
gift.
wonderful memories for you, even though, as you've said, it's been difficult, taking care of her. But there's those special things that she can give you, singing to you, the stories. And, when my mom got sick, I kept telling everybody I was so sad because I thought my mother and I had a love-hate relationship. And that's how we described it over and over again. And I realized within one day of being with her, it was my interpretation. I was looking for something from her that she didn't know how to give. My mother was the youngest of 7. She wasn't brought up by her mother. She was brought up by her sisters. And when my mother kept asking my brothers to do things for me, I felt like, why can't you do it, Mom? And it didn't occur to me until there I was being with her. And I thought, I don't like seeing her like this, but this is a gift. I get to spend time with my mother. And we did record her telling some of the most god-awful jokes. But I needed to, and so did my brothers. And so even today, if I'm feeling sad, I will think of something that she said or did. And, it brings a smile to my face. And that's what I see that your mother-in-law is doing for you as well.
Yeah.
And even the paintings that Dave left behind, because you say so many are important to you.
Yeah. I think this boundaries and letting go conversation is just so important, because it's something that continues on through the journey at different levels. You know, most of the boundary conversations happen pretty early on, but there are boundary conversations that happen later. And so making a plan, thinking through, when are you ready to let go of the next layer? What is the next layer?
And when is the next layer?
Yep. No right time, just your time.
Well, I want to share with our listeners that Allison, Candace, Carol, and Christy are all grief coaches. Their style may be a little bit different, but I'm learning a lot from all four of you, that whether you're in that grieving stage or not, there is something about understanding grief that can get you through just about anything in life. But it may happen quickly, and for some of us, it may take a long time for us to absorb it. But I think one of the best gifts we could give ourselves is learning more and, talking to a coach. We prepare for childbirth, but we don't prepare for death. Well, maybe we can prepare by finding out what, grief coaching is all about, because it does add a lot of life and memories to us. I want to thank you all again for being part of our monthly podcast. I also want to tell you that I'm using a new form of Zoom, and you all probably heard it. It kicked in and said, we're recording, and the recording light was on before then. So if we missed anything in the beginning, we apologize. We probably will repeat ourselves again to some degree next month. But that is a lesson that I should have learned. Never use something new when you're doing a podcast. So I apologize. Have a great day.
We forgive you.
Oh, thank you. And someday you can all laugh about it. In the meantime, have a great day, and we will see you all next month. Take care.
Allison, huge hugs to you all, but huge hugs to you, Allison.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We're all with you,
Yeah.
honey. Bye-bye now.